Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our January Next Partner webinar. First of all, happy and healthy New Year to everyone. Hope everyone had a respite holiday season with friends and family. We are excited to kick off 2024 with a super hot topic that really should be well understood by all startup founders. First, my name is Lisa Friedlander. I am the CRO over here at Next, powered by Shulman Rogers. Next is an award-winning platform for the delivery of legal services to startups and emerging growth companies. And these monthly partner webinars are just one of many things that we do on a regular basis to support the ecosystem here in the DMV and beyond, as well as de-risk startups to make sure that they know everything that they need to know about launching and scaling a startup. It's my honor to introduce the wonderful folks from Inspiralia. We are going to be talking about non-dilutive funding through breakthrough innovation. The SBIR world, which, as I was saying to Diane a moment ago, is a strange and mysterious world that not everybody understands. So we are going to demystify today and talk about how your innovation could be applicable to R&D funding, which is non-dilutive funding. So super, super important opportunity. Dr. Diane Hickey is a seasoned entrepreneur and an expert in commercializing innovations. Diane's passion for helping others chase their dreams led her to create the Diamond Chameleon Group. And now she is leading the team over at Inspiralia. We're also fortunate to have joining us today from the Inspiralia team, Fernando Hernandez. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to both of you to introduce yourselves further. Folks, we're fortunate that Diane and Fernando have agreed to make this more informal. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand, put your questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring them, but feel free to interrupt at any time with questions. This is being recorded, so please make sure that no question contains any confidential information. So Diane, Fernando, welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having us here today. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and give me a nod if everybody can see the screen now. Excellent.
Looks great.
So again, thank you to Next and to Lisa for inviting us to talk about non-dilutive funding for breakthrough information. So most of you are familiar with the term dilutive funding. A portion of your company will be given to the people who give you the money. This is non-dilutive, so this comes from the government, and we'll talk a little bit more about the non-dilutive nature of it. And Inspiralia is a new product company headquartered in Miami, and the mission is to secure funding for our clients to bring their new products to market. We have an entire 360-degree service from beginning to end on this topic. So your presenters today, thank you, Lisa, for introducing me. Fernando is the head of the Department of Defense Division here in Inspiralia, and he is an experienced consultant in the deep tech innovations. And you'll see that DoD is really important because it has the lion's share of the funding from the SBIR program. Sandra was going to present with me today, but unfortunately she could not. She would normally be completely in charge of the non-DoD solicitation. So what is we keep saying SBIR. How many of you guys, by show of hands or whatever, are familiar with the Department of Defense? If you are, it would be called SBIR. Because that's typically how they refer to it, and I'm not really sure why there's a difference. It stands for Small Business Innovation Research Program. I mean, if you had a T at the end. So the Small Business Innovation Research Program. There's also something called the STTR, which if you're working with a university would be appropriate. But it's actually the largest and most important source of federally funded early stage research and development funding. The SBA, the Small Business Administration, runs the entire SBIR process. It's the umbrella organization. It has an annual budget of over $3 billion. Now, the important part, as I was saying, is if you get one of these awards, there's no equity taken. You keep your IP, and it funds all the costs of an R&D project, including overhead, and even allows for a small 10% or 7% business fee, just like a profit, since it is for a business. Come on, there we go. So how it works, oops, I knew it would go to. For every SBIR, there's typically done in phases. So no matter what agency you get it from, there's a phase 1, which is a concept or validation stage. It can range normally 6 months to 1 year, and it can range from $75,000 for some agencies up to $275,000 for others, depending on what they're looking for, what the project is involved. If you win that, you then can apply for the phase 2, which is most people don't apply for just that phase 1. You want to get the phase 2, which is a 2-year, $1 million-ish, or in some cases, $500,000, in some cases up to $1.7 million for your prototype development in order to get your innovation to the point where it can be brought to market, either through partnerships, through direct sales. We just call it commercialization. Phase 3 commercialization, it's called phase 3, but it's not any additional funding. This is where you should be going to market, or in some cases can get additional phase 2s and then, or private investment, obviously. So you'll see here the little pie chart. The Department of Defense gets the most money, Health and Human Services, and that includes the National Institute of Health, gets the next. And then the Department of Energy, the National Science Foundation, and NASA kind of split up the rest. There are some small ones from some of the other agencies, but the SBIR program is a direct percentage of how much R&D funding the overall agency gets. Now, that's about the end of the similarities when you talk about an SBIR project across agencies, because each agency runs their program differently. In most agencies, it's a top-down. So this is Department of Energy, most of the Department of Defense, EPA, USDA. They will set out a solicitation, which means they'll say, you know, we want you, they're soliciting proposals in these very particular categories. Like Department of Energy might be small-scale nuclear reactors, or high particle detectors for something that's just being launched. EPA might be obviously something with water for things. The USDA might be drones for looking at agricultural mapping. Things, it could be just about anything. And with the Department of Defense, it's normally called a broad area announcement, a BAA, if you've ever heard that, that they're looking a broad agency. It's BAA. I'll get those acronyms right in a minute. Now, the more interesting ones, though, are the bottom up. And this is why NSF typically rolls to the top, and we'll talk about that. It's open to any technology, any innovation, any market that will advance the nation. And it's probably the only agency that is not interested in actually using whatever it funds. The other open topics agency is AFWorks, and that's what Fernando will talk about. That has a very different process than almost any other agency. It's very interesting and quicker than most of the other agencies in getting a response, and a very interesting way to enter the Department of Defense contracting world.
Diane, quick question in the chat before you move on. If you have a beta client, can you still apply for phase 2?
Yes. Absolutely. That would be even great. You could even apply for phase 1. I mean, that's fantastic. Typically, if you have a beta client, there's still research and development that needs to happen before you get it out to the masses. So this is the 2023 calendar of when there are deadlines. Announcements normally happen about 3 months ahead of time, and then the deadlines occur. January, February, and March are grayed out because if you were thinking of applying to any of those, you should have been thinking about 3 months ago. It takes about 3 months to create the proposal and get all the government registrations in place. Now, this is one of the most important questions any of you guys in the audience will be asking is, am I eligible? Is my company eligible to get this funding? So first of all, it is for small businesses. You must be a for-profit company in some respect. So not a nonprofit, but there are some of those, and I'm sure I'm forgetting the term, but there are some that are profit oriented, but for the good of the world, those count. But you must be a small business, less than 500 employees, which for most of us in the startup world, that would be huge, right? 25 is not small. So most people will fit. So even if you are associated with a larger company that has a few hundred people and has an innovation that you want to pursue, this would be good, or if you want to partner with that company because they have the facilities. You must be owned by a US citizen or a permanent resident. And you must have at least one W-2 worker. And the principal investigator, which would be the main person running the project, must be employed by the company at least 51% of the time. You must also have a physical place to actually do the work. And of course, with a lot of the some like app development, whatever, that's still, but can be done remotely, but you must have a kind of a physical address. And a lot of that's not typically a problem anymore with a lot of the incubators.
So it could be just to interrupt real quickly, because a
Yeah.
lot of work is being done virtually now. So if you were at a co-working space, for example, that would be fine.
Absolutely. Or I even know some of the co-working spaces that just rent out a mailbox in a location. That would also be fine.
Okay. So not a stringent actually in the office kind of requirement.
No, but it also depends on the research to be done. If you're doing laboratory research for the NIH, obviously they'd want to know where your speakers are, things like that.
Right. And then real quick, Diane, before you move on, there's a question about the PI employment. Can you explain the PI employment a bit more?
Sure. Right. Now it's PI, it's Principal Investigator, and that's the term used for the project manager, if you will, or the main technical person. So these aren't very large grants. If you can think about $275,000 for 6 months to a year. If you have a seasoned scientist, and their salary will, if they're going to be a large part. So if they're working on this 25% of the time, that's a large chunk of the budget. So they want the PI to be employed by the company over 51%. So if you have a professor, let's say is your senior person running the project, they must be employed by the company more than they're employed by a university. Or if you're working on this as you have a day job and you're working on this as your startup, then you still must be employed more than 50% by the company. Does that help? We can explain it a little bit further. Fernando, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, it's basically the time that they need to spend working on the project. It has to be the majority of the other time. And like Diane said, there is that 6 months to 1 year for phase 1. Then there's a gap, right? Well, you wait for the results of your phase 2. So that can change at that point. But then by the time you start the phase 2 project, you have to go back to being majority of the time employed by the applicant company.
So
and then there's a question in the chat too. Can they work for another government institution or company? Sounds like as long as they're employed at least 51% by the company, what they do for the 49% doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. So it really, the problem is whenever there's a conflict of interest. For example, Diane mentioned before, there's an STTR possibility. When you work you're an applicant company and you're working with the university. We had a case where one of our clients, someone on their payroll was a professor in that university and was working in the project. So there are some exceptions in that case, but in this case, if you're working for a government institution in addition to the company, as long as you meet that, 51% of your time dedicated to the company throughout that project, then it's fine.
Okay. And then another question, what about, can the founder be considered the PI? So they're not technically employed because maybe they're not taking a salary. Does that count?
So by the time they need to be a W-2 employee, by the time they get their grant. So that's a good question, because by the time you submit the application, you don't need to be a W-2 employee, but before you get the grant, you go through this due diligence process, which could last 2 weeks, maybe a month. So you have that time before you actually start receiving the grant to become a W-2 employee.
So if you're the founder, you have to start paying yourself.
Exactly.
Does it matter what? Doesn't matter what.
Either it depends on the project again, right? So in the background, obviously, of the person, usually the co-founder with the strongest technical background is going to be the principal investigator. You still need other team members, again, depending on the agency. But for example, AFWorks, you need someone that has more of a commercial business background. So they're also going to be that's usually the CEO most of the time.
Okay. Got it. All right. Thank you.
And
great questions, everybody.
these are investments. So when I was a program director, you want to invest in this project. You want to see it happen. So if something wonderful happens, let's just say your company really just starts going and the principal investigator has to be replaced with someone else, you want to make sure that the salary in there is comparable to the skill set. And then if you just turn around and invest that entire amount back into the company, it's your prerogative once it's your money. So that was kind of the way that we looked at the principal investigator and if it was a founder or a CEO who originally wasn't taking salary, you want to be able to still continue the project. Okay. For the project idea now, it needs to be innovative, that there are going to be technical risks that need to be researched. Preferably it's not been done before. Well, not preferably, it needs to have not been done before. Again, it's innovation. And there must be a logical path to commercialization, that there must be a way for this to go to market. There is a market need. You can subcontract out some of the work. You don't have to do it all within your company. Like there's some particular kind of testing that needs to be done, but all the R&D has to be done on American soil. So we're going to talk about the National Science Foundation tactical information. I'm going to try to go through this a little bit quickly, and we can go deeper into it as we go if there are questions. But I want to get to the AFWorks part with Fernando as well. So the National Science Foundation really tends to focus on startups with the earliest stages of technology transition. Each startup can receive up to $2 million. And the submission window dates, as you can see, there's a March 1st, which you might be saying, well, it's still 6 weeks away. This is a very significant proposal process, and there's also a pre-proposal part for the National Science Foundation. It isn't a rapid investment, but it is open topics, is extremely competitive, 90% decline rate, so that you should know that going in. But if you do get it, it is a boon, not only to just for the funding coming in, the $275K for your phase 1, and then your 1 million phase 2, and then there's some additional, but also for the getting outside investment. If you have a technical risky project, having the NSF fund it through phase 2 really says a lot to future investors. The 3 criteria that it's judged on is intellectual merit, commercialization potential, and broader impact. The biggest part here is that it's R&D funding of new products with high technical risk. So it's not going to be the next iteration of your thing. It's definitely going to be something technically new, and it needs. When someone asked earlier about if you already had a beta customer, having early market validation is quite good to show that it has commercialization potential. As I said, they're not looking for any incremental modifications, just straightforward engineering without any technical risk, like, oh, we know this is going to be needed, but you just need to have, we just need to scale it up, and we know how to do that. It has to have some level of technical risk. And if you already have a product that doesn't need any additional R&D, it just needs testing, that also is not an appropriate NSF proposal. You can go out to seedfund.gov, here, seedfund.nsf.gov, or just put in NSF SBIR, and you'll see that they have all these topic areas. They fund almost any kind of technology. Here's a list of everything from digital health, Internet of Things, quantum information technologies, wireless, mobility. They have everything except for anything that would be with digital health or things like that. Anything that requires clinical trials would not be funded. So the ideal
question, Diane, before you go into the ideal candidate, can you use the same proposal for multiple applications, like the same topic concept for both, like Navy and NSF, for example?
Yes, you can. Absolutely. And we highly recommend that you do, because these efforts are intensive, and definitely use them for other things. Also, if you have particular different kind of research, that this is research for this thing that's very attractive for the National Science Foundation, but for the Defense Department, it might be a little bit different. You can even get 2 awards at the same time.
And then a follow-up question, can you repeat the piece on the clinical trial requirements real quick?
Yep. So the National Science Foundation, even though they do all topics, they will not fund a clinical trial. However, they do fund things like medical devices, and there's normally some research that needs to be done before you can even get to clinical trials. So this would be an SBIR if you have something about a medical device or a medical innovation procedure that you can work on prior to applying to the NIH for your clinical trials. The NIH SBIRs do clearly fund clinical trials.
Exactly. So this is also, just to add here, it's a good example. The previous question, right? Can you submit 2 proposals or for the same project to 2 different agencies? And this is one case where you can do that. So NSF won't allow you to do that in clinical trials, but let's say you need to work on that software and hardware component of the project first. So you go to NSF and they will fund those activities, and then you can go to NIH. And if you need to run a clinical trial, it's the same project, but they're going to fund the clinical trial itself.
Yes, good one, Fernando. Thank you. So for the National Science Foundation, and these are the ideal candidates that you're a small business, normally less than 10 employees, you're early stage, been founded in the past 2 to 3 years, pre-revenue or less than $1 million. You've been bootstrapped, or you have less than 10 million in seed funding, but normally quite a bit less. And you've not had an SBIR award in the past, either from the NSF or from anyone else. They want to be the first money in, the very really cutting edge innovation. And then you'll go on for other SBIRs is the intention. And it's a one and done. If you get an NSF grant, phase 1 and phase 2, you will not be getting another one in the future. But all the other agencies are open to you. Technology profile. You have some preliminary work that showed that this has promise. The technology readiness level, if you're familiar with that TRL, would be a very low, 3 to 4. So it's not just one experiment, which would be a TRL 1, and it's not completely ready to go to market, TRL 9. It's going to be 2 to 3 years away from being even able to be introduced to, at the way that you see it, into your market. High risk, the research and development hasn't been done before. and you have some level of a validated idea product market fit. So again, that beta customer or letters of intent saying we need this, or even other companies in the market getting investment that, but you have a novel way of getting there. The way that you follow to submit a proposal is you'd have that idea. One thing you can do with Inspiralia is we will validate it and then think about and for free, a free validation of if the idea is a good fit for the NSF, and then possibly other funding mechanisms after that. And then if we proceed, there'd be a kickoff meeting, you draft the proposal. There's a couple more steps in here I'm going to go through. But
quick question, Diane, sorry to interrupt before you go on. Can you talk about sort of a crowdfunding campaign and an SBIR application? How do the two, will one hurt the other?
No, a crowdfunding campaign should not hurt an SBIR application. And it depends a little bit though on the crowdfunding, how it affects your cap table. So if the crowdfunding, if you did that and you gave away equity, that might look, if you have, a very crowded cap table. But if it was just for delivering an initial product or to support what you're doing, then no, that's just investment showing that there's interest. So it's actually, any money in is quite good.
Thank you.
So the first step would be to validate your project, make sure it's a good fit for NSF before moving on. If it is, and the National Science Foundation requires you to do a project pitch, which is out on their website. You could do this yourself if you wanted as well. You go out, you'll say, apply now or submit now. And the project pitch is about a 3-page pitch. It's not a video pitch, but it does cover the main areas that proposal would. And you'll wait about 2 to 3 weeks to find out if you then are invited to do a proposal. When I was a program director, people would be very upset, like, I should be able to submit a proposal. This is, with a 90% decline rate of the proposals submitted, it's very clear early on if your project is not going to be a fit. So it's actually a blessing to find out via the project pitch if you're going to have a fit or not before you go through the entire process for submitting a proposal. And working with experienced grant writers like Inspiralia, they'll know if it's likely that your project pitch will be accepted. If you're brought in to, if you're invited to submit a proposal, it takes about 8 weeks to create the full grant proposal, plus getting the company registrations from the different government websites, and then you'd submit. It's a pretty significant process. Here is a little bit more of like just the pitch submission and then the proposal. After that, the applications go through a merit review process. If they like what you're doing, they'll ask you to go through due diligence, very similar to any other kind of due diligence. And then if it's accepted, then you'll get $275,000. This is a little bit of the project description. I'm going to skip that. It's a pretty elaborate proposal process. Sorry, it's 15 pages max, which is actually quite hard when you're going through market analysis. You're describing your technology, so it gets pretty compact. Now, again, when I talk about the National Science Foundation, that it doesn't move very quickly, though it's open topics, you'd be writing and getting ready to submit. You'd submit here. Proposal gets reviewed during this time. In December, goes through, if you might be contacted, about 10% of the applicants are contacted to go through due diligence, and then you might be awarded. In February of next year, you would get your $275,000, and then you can apply 6 months later for the phase 2, and then you apply in the next window for that $1 million. So again, that's kind of along that line of a 2 to 3 year R&D project.
And Diane, there's a question in the chat about how to overcome financial disincentives for SBIR between compliance costs, for example, NIST 800-171 and Section 174 tax obligations. Does this make sense to you? I'm sure it does.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I don't know if Fernando has a little bit more. I know that there's some new tax laws that really are concerning to some of the awardees that I've been talking to, but that they might have been changing, that they're not set in stone yet. Fernando, do you know anything about these?
Yeah, and they also mentioned the profit margin that you get, right, at 7%, and that's it's not profit fee, so you can use that on outside of the project as well. So it's 7%. That's correct for the phase 1, and some agencies like NSF, they increase that to 10% from your phase 2 award as well. I mean, at the end, it's as we mentioned in the beginning, it's non-dilutive funding. At this point, startups are just very early stage. They're trying to get funding, and it makes more sense to not give away equity when you're going through that process. And like Diane mentioned, it helps a lot when it comes to showing to investors, say, I already have funding from the government, showing that interest in my technology, showing that it works. And so yeah, it's part of, I would say that those are pretty good incentives to decide going for an SBIR application.
Yes, because there aren't that many people who give you $2 million without the
Indeed.
some company. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Fernando.
If you want, I can share my screen, and then we go directly to AFWorks. So just 1 second. Okay, you should be able to see that. Let me know if you don't.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. All right, so at the very beginning, Diane was explaining how we have that those top-down agencies and bottom-up agencies, right? So the Department of Defense was one of those that they're very specific about the type of projects they want to fund, and it's difficult to find a perfect fit. You have to be at the right stage of development, and have a set of objectives that's perfectly aligned with what that specific branch of DoD, Navy, or Army, or Air Force is looking for. So the Air Force decided to take part of the SBIR budget that they get every year and present a new version of SBIR funding, right? So instead of saying, okay, this is what we need, let's see if for some miracle there's a company that's at that stage of development and they're doing this, great. And so what they did instead of that was saying, all right, we're going to be open topic. We're going to allow startups to submit their phase 1 applications and giving them a chance to tell us why their technology could be useful for the Air Force and for the Department of Defense in general. So that's your phase 1 application, is you pitching your technology, explaining why you think the Air Force could use this technology, and this could go not just for Air Force personnel. It's also solutions that can benefit their family members as well. And then what you do with that phase 1 award, which is a very small award, $75,000, but your goal is not to develop, let's say, this doesn't go towards research and development itself, it goes towards customer discovery. So you need to find a potential customer and a potential end user in the Air Force. So this is typically an Air Force base that wants to use your technology, or an Air Force hospital, for example. And you have 3 months to find that partner in the Air Force. So once you have that, then you're able to craft your R&D roadmap. What are the activities, what are the objectives that you're going to be doing in order to customize your solution and meet the needs of this specific customer in the Air Force? So that's going to be your phase 2 project. And this is when you get $1,250,000 to develop this solution, and they give you 21 months to do that. They also, one thing that's different from when it comes to AFWorks is that the budget changes if it's an STTR. So this is when you partner up with a research institution, usually a university. So that budget increases from 75,000 to 110,000 in phase one, and then 1.25 million to 1.8 million in phase two. Obviously, you need to consider that that difference in the budget is going to go to the university. This is the ideal candidate in terms of the type of company that is selected. As you can see, it's a little bit more established companies than those that would go for an NSF award. So typically AFWorks is going to be looking at companies that are either generating revenues already and obviously have customers, or that have a very advanced a prototype that you can show that you have some kind of market validation. If you're familiar with the technology readiness level chart, you need to be over that at least 5, 6, where you've already tested and proven your prototype. And then the number of employees, it varies. I mean, we have clients with just 3 members that have been able to win a phase 1 and phase 2 with AFWorks, and some companies over 50 employees as well. Like I said, the main goal here is for your company to be able to rapidly repurpose their solution to meet the needs of your customer. So that's what usually they want companies that are in a more advanced stage of development. In terms of timeline, it's a little, let's say it's much quicker than other agencies. So the next
Fernando,
deadline, yeah.
Sorry, before you go to the time, there was an appropriate question. Is it sufficient for the idea market fit phase 1 application to state the Air Force will be the customer, or is it necessary to have sold initial pilot customer agreement in place at the time of the phase 1 application? So,
okay.
Yeah,
no. So you don't need to have any agreement in place. That's a great question, actually. You don't have to have any agreement in place at the moment that you submit your phase 1 application, because the phase 1 award goes towards, that's what you're going to be using it for. If you need to travel and go to events with potential, Air Force stakeholders that could be your partners, then you use the funding for that. All you need to do is just, obviously you're going to be doing research on Air Force bases and what kind of technology they're using and what they're looking for. And in your proposal, you mentioned, hey, I've identified these 3 potential customers. And that's what proves that, let's say, defense need. But you don't necessarily have to have that customer agreement when you submit your phase 1 award. In fact, if you did happen to have that, then I would suggest skipping phase 1, because AFWorks gives you that options, and go straight to phase 2. You can do that as well if you have that customer memo in place. All right, and then in terms of timeline, this is for the phase 1 applications. They have a deadline coming up on March 7th, and actually for AFWorks, the proposal package it's smaller than the typical SBIR, so we are still taking projects for this particular deadline up until the end of January. Obviously, with the caveat that if you don't have a SAM.gov registration in place, then yes, unfortunately, I would say that you will not be able to make it, because like I mentioned, it takes up to 8 weeks to get all of these company registrations and government registrations in place. But then once you submit the proposal, they have a mandate 60 days to get back to you with the results. And what they're going to be evaluating is the defense need, the technical merit of the project, and the commercialization, right? When they try to understand whether you're at the right stage of development to carry on with this project. So that means that beginning of May, you already know whether you got the phase 1 award or not, and you start executing the phase 1 project. Like I said before, it's 3 months to the period of performance for phase 1. The idea is that during those 3 months, you find the customer and the end user that you're going to be working with from the Air Force, You submit your customer memorandum. This is where you describe the work that you're going to be doing. And then it's again, after you submit that phase 2 proposal with the customer memo, you have 60 days for them to give you the results. And then at that point, you start working on your phase 2 project. So end of 2024, you could be already working on your phase 2. However, like I mentioned, there is also that option to skip phase 1 directly if you're able to get that customer memorandum without using the phase 1 award. And you can submit your phase 2 application in May. That's going to be the next deadline for direct to phase 2. Okay, so the other part, like some tips that we wanted to share about, this is now outside of AFWERX or SBIR in general. How do I know if this is a good fit for me? How do I know if my technology is something that could be of interest? And especially, how can I identify which agencies would be interested in working with me? So one really good tip is just going to sbir.gov and looking at the topics and just do a quick search using some keywords, and then you're going to see the solicitations that are available, and the ones that may be closed recently, but at least give you a really good hint about what kind of technologies they're interested in. Each agency has different deadlines, and solicitations are released throughout the year. The ones that we spoke about today, AFWERX and NSF, are quite interesting because they're open topic. And then typically the path that our clients follow is first NSF, because that's your very early stage type of companies that they're funding. And once you go through that phase 1 and you start having, you develop your prototype, then you can go to AFWERX. And AFWERX is a great way to enter the DoD contract space. What ends up happening is that at the end of your phase 2, if you have an Air Force customer that's happy with your technology, they'll go ahead and offer you a procurement contract. They want to buy your product, and then what you start receiving also, we've noticed with some of our clients, is other branches. Let's say the Navy contacts them and say, hey, we saw what you guys did for the Air Force. Can you develop something like that for us? We have different requirements, right? So then they'll release a contract solicitation, for you to work with them as well.
And while you're here, Fernando, I just wanted to jump back in there. SBIR.gov. So we've spoken a lot about how Inspiralia works and how Inspiralia works for customers, only to show that the kind of involvement in getting these programs are phenomenal. They're great for the companies that get them, but there is a process to get involved. SBIR.gov is a great resource for everything out there, finding out if you're a good fit, finding out if there are partners in your area. Most small business development offices will also have people that are familiar with SBIR at a very high level, not in the details that a service provider like ourselves would be getting into. But there are other SBIR.gov. I just wanted to say it's a great resource if you wanted to find other all the different options available to you. And they have a road tour coming up in a couple of weeks as well, so with some information.
Yeah, and I think, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we could also just share both these presentations with everybody, so that they have all these tools available. This is a little bit of just the registrations that I mentioned before that you need to have in place in order to go for any of these grants. The main one is that system for award management. Once you have that, then you need the specific ones for each agency. The SIP for Department of Defense, Research.gov, in this case for NSF, it's the two that we spoke about today. But NIH has their own one, DOE has their own one. And then yes, this is what we mentioned before about the validation. So in case you're interested in figuring out whether this is something that makes sense for you, our team can very quickly go through a project pitch or slide presentation that you have about your company, and with that we can tell you, first of all, whether it is a good SBIR project, if it makes sense to go after something like this. See, more importantly, if there are any solicitations available that you could apply for, And then we like building some sort of pathway when it comes to grants, right? So this should be your first target. They have a deadline coming up, 2 months from now, and then right after that, you should go after this other agency. This is a deadline, and these are the objectives you should present. So it's something that we offer free of charge, and in case you're interested, we'll have our email addresses also at the very last slide. This is just something we wanted to show in terms of some tips when it comes to the proposal writing. These are just two same content, two different proposals, but one thing that happens with some clients is they're very focused on the technology, and you might not have someone that's an expert on that specific technology reviewing your proposal. So you need to make it as easy to understand and as easy to read as possible. So here are just some tips that we added on this slide, and yeah, well, information about Inspiralia itself. Like, what we're trying to do here is bridging that gap between startups and the government, and how to access SBIR funding. We know what kind of let's say we have a very good understanding of how to prepare a successful application, but it all comes down to the innovation, the technology itself, and the team that's involved behind the project. So we're more of, we help you have all the tools necessary to access that funding. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the actual work, the research and development, that's done by the companies. We can just support you with all the administrative and the, let's say, the bureaucratic part of handling a grant.
Yeah, the thing I like to say is that Inspiralia sees hundreds of proposals a year versus if you're working on it, you're doing one, and it's pretty intimidating.
Yeah, especially that part of the administrative award management. A lot of companies think, okay, I made it, I got here. Now you have, if it's a phase 2, you have 2-year project, and each one of the agencies has a completely different system that they work with. So it's something to really take into account. It doesn't end when you get the grant. That's really when it all starts, and you need to dedicate a lot of time for it. So yeah, I mean, if you have any other questions, I know we've been going through some of those during the presentation, but feel free to jump in and ask any questions.
We have a new question to the chat. Can the subcontractor be a company based overseas, for example, Canada? Diane shaking her head. Also, what is the maximum percentage of project budget that can be allocated to subcontractors?
Yeah, so the first one is a no. I mean, there are very few exceptions. You have to really make a strong case about why that specific company is the only provider that can work with you. But I would really suggest finding a different subcontractor on American soil. And then in terms of what's the maximum percentage, so for the phase 1 projects, it's 1/3 of your budget, so 33% that you can outsource for subcontractors, but then they increase that in phase 2 to up to 50% that you can subcontract.
So, any other questions for Diane and Fernando? Feel free to unmute, chime in, raise your hand. Fernando, maybe you guys will stop sharing, right, so we can see everybody in the room and make sure that we get anybody. And then here's another question for the PI or project personnel. You mentioned that they should be permanent residents or US citizens, or individuals with other type of visas also eligible to work on the project.
You're eligible to work on the project. The US citizen and the permanent resident must be owning the company. And I don't know about the principal investigator, Fernando.
Yeah, no, it's either US citizen or green card holder.
Got it. And Bernard, we were going to circle Diane and Fernando. Maybe you guys will put your emails in the chat, but don't worry, we are going to circulate both the deck and then I will copy Diane and Fernando so you guys have access to them. My takeaway from this, and yes, it will come off as a plug for Inspiralia, but it's a legit and meaningful one. I get the question a lot of, well, do I need a lawyer for this? Or at what point do I need a lawyer? And look, resources are always tight at any stage along the way. So yeah, there are certain things you can probably get away with in the DIY approach. And then there are certain things that you don't. And I can answer that question in terms of legal. To me, this is so potentially overwhelming and potentially game changing for a company that to me, this is an absolute mandatory, whether it's you guys or somebody else. If you're gonna take the time to do one of these things, best to have Inspiralia on your side to navigate the waters. It's just there's so much time and expense that goes into it. You're going to wish you did if you haven't, is my big takeaway from listening to all of this.
I appreciate that, Lisa. And let me give you an example as well. There are many opportunities out there. You know, there are service providers, grant writers. You hear about these, and some of my most disappointing moments as a program director was talking to people who had been given money by their state to hire a grant writer, and they maybe written 1 or 2 grants before for a particular SBIR, and of course they didn't get it. And then I even spoke to one as a pre introduction to Inspiralia or you know, an initial discussion. He had gone through a 6-month program through their small business development office locally to specifically write an NSF SBIR, and went through the whole program. And they, you know, were told, don't be disappointed if you get declined even after doing all of this. And so then he came back to me and he's like, I'd really like to engage Inspiralia because you do see what gets awarded, what doesn't. You can tweak it, you can make it better. The other benefit about Inspiralia is that this is the only company that I'm aware of that works on these success fees. So a grant writer I've talked to, many of them before at the SBIR conferences, that I was like, if somebody comes to you and they want you to write the grant, will you write it even though you know they're not going to get it more than likely? They're like, well, yeah, if they're going to give some money, we'll write it. So Inspiralia will only take you on if they feel that there's a good chance of getting the award. And the reason for that is there is an upfront cost. But if you win the award, there is a success fee that Inspiralia takes. Fernando, I don't know if you wanted to go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, exactly. And thank you for your kind words, Lisa and Diane. And yes, I mean, we're very selective when it comes to the companies that we work with. And that's why we do also that validation that I mentioned before. If we don't think the company or the project is a good fit, we're going to tell you why we believe that's the case. And then for a startup, I think it's important information because you need to be very selected also with the time that you dedicate for to this project. So yes, I mean, we do have that small entrance fee that goes towards, you know, not just the writing of the proposal, but also setting up all the registrations. We have a team, a specific office that takes care of that part on behalf of our clients. But then most of our you know, fee structure is based on that success fee. And you know, it's a long-term collaboration. As you saw, the phase 1 can go up to 1 year and then phase 2 up to 2 years. So again, very selective with the companies that we work with. But once we work on one application, then our target is to let's try and identify as many other potential solicitations we can submit for other agencies, right? So if there is anything that's released by a different agency and you have, you know, 2 months to apply because that's the timeline that the agency gave, we're going to let you know. We're going to be monitoring those and make sure that you don't miss out on those opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's critical.
One of the companies that when you get the PowerPoint, you'll see some of the case studies. One of them was a speech technology for nonverbal children, you know, how to interpret what they mean by the sounds that they do make. And after the NSF, then they got an IH. They got several more awards and even some that weren't government awards because Inspiralia already had all the information to submit for, say, they were doing something with the Unreal Engine from Epic, if you're familiar with Epic Games. They even got an Epic mega grant. And I think Inspiralia helped a little bit with that just because it was such a short little, you know, we'll just copy and paste from here and submit.
That's awesome. And what is your success fee? A question from Andrew in the chat.
Right.
Yeah, so that varies depending on the specific agency, and because AFWorks, for example, has one business model, then for NSF is a different one. But in general, it goes from 12.5 to 15% of the award size, and that will include the services that come after you get the award, right? So those 2 years that you're working on the reporting and any changes that need to be made throughout the project for phase 2, we're still providing services, and it's all covered through that success fee as well.
So not to be too big, so there's an upfront just writing fee that doesn't really even cover costs. So with the NSF, it could be up to $10,000 depending on how much work you already have done. It could be less, but there's, as you saw, a significant amount of work involved. For AFWorks, can be somewhere in the 5,000 or less range, depending on how much. I don't know if you've never written anything before, or if you have a lot of stuff already available to work with the teams. But there's that initial fee, and then the success fee on the back end.
Awesome. Terrific. Well, this has been just as productive as I anticipated it would be, and certainly sheds a lot of light for myself, and as I appreciate everyone else here. So Diane, thank you. Fernando, thank you. Please go ahead and send me today's presentation. I will make sure I circulate it to everyone, copy you both, so everybody then has additional ways of getting in touch with you. And as a reminder, today's recording will be published across a number of platforms and accessible after the fact. So thank you so much again, and we wish everybody a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.